1 second, one mistake, one life lost forever. 1,000 small decisions measured and rehearsed over a lifetime just to survive encounters like this. His fingers brushed the device. Brad Walker's mind, poisoned by prejudice, saw not a man, but a weapon. "Don't move!" Brad screamed, but the shout was tangled in panic, not command. Before Ethan could even withdraw the phone, before he could even explain, before reason could catch up to fear, Brad drew his Glock 19, a flash of metal, a thunderous bang. The world fractured. Ethan staggered backward, the breath ripped from his lungs. A crimson bloom spread across his clean shirt. His back struck the side of the Lexus with a hollow thud. His eyes, those fierce, kind eyes that had once stared down war itself, widened in disbelief. This wasn't a battlefield. There were no enemy combatants here, no insurgents, no bombs buried under sand. Just one man and another man's hatred. His legs buckled. The cell phone slipped from his grasp, bouncing once before settling near the growing pool of blood. Ethan collapsed onto the asphalt, the warm pavement now an unforgiving grave. His breathing became shallow, quick, desperate. A few pedestrians across the street gasped, frozen in horror. But Brad didn't rush to help. He didn't call for immediate medical aid. He just stood there, gun still raised, eyes still burning, heart pounding not from righteousness, but from fear. In the distance, sirens began to howl, a mournful chorus that would be too little, too late. As minutes dragged on like hours, Ethan lay motionless. No curses, no screams, just the wet, ragged sound of breath slipping away. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath with him. The sky above was still impossibly blue. The leaves still danced lazily to the ground. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a park just a few blocks away. Unaware that history had just been shattered on a quiet suburban street, and as Ethan Carter's chest rose for the final time. Somewhere far away, in a warm kitchen, a mother prepared a cake, humming softly, waiting for a son who would never walk through the door again. One heartbeat, one breath, one bullet. That's all it took to silence a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and dreams. But even as his body grew still, Ethan's story was just beginning to roar into the world. A neighbor, trembling, raised their phone and captured the scene. The footage would spread like wildfire, across Oak Valley, across the state, across a nation already weary and aching for change. The lie Brad Walker would try to tell of a dangerous man reaching for a weapon would not survive the light of day, because lying in the center of the street, next to a black Lexus, surrounded by crimson, was the truth, cold and undeniable. A phone, a life stolen, a dream extinguished, and a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of Oak Valley and beyond. One bullet, that's all it took to end the life of a decorated U.S. Army colonel on the very streets he swore to protect. Ethan Carter wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was a hero, a man who had survived battlefields abroad, only to fall victim to hatred at home. Oak Valley was supposed to be peaceful that autumn afternoon, families setting tables, leaves falling gently like whispered promises of safety. But for Ethan, safety was an illusion. Today, we uncover not just the story of one man's tragedy, but the chilling reminder that justice too can bleed. Stay with us, because this isn't just a story. It's a call to remember, to feel, and to stand for something greater. One bullet, that's all it took to end the life of a decorated U.S. Army colonel on the very streets he swore to protect. Ethan Carter wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was a hero, a man who had survived battlefields abroad, only to fall victim to hatred at home. Oak Valley was supposed to be peaceful that autumn afternoon, families setting tables, leaves falling gently like whispered promises of safety. But for Ethan, safety was an illusion. Today we uncover not just the story of one man's tragedy, but the chilling reminder that justice too can bleed. Stay with us, because this isn't just a story. It's a call to remember, to feel, and to stand for something greater. Inside the Lexus, Ethan sighed, glancing into his rearview mirror. He wasn't naive. He had worn the uniform, stood post in foreign deserts, defended people he didn't even know. But here, on his home soil, he knew a different war was coming. Calmly, methodically, he signaled, slowed down, and pulled over beneath an ancient oak. Hands at 10 and 2, window cracked halfway. Every move a silent prayer to survive the encounter. Brad approached, his boots pounding on the asphalt, one hand already gripping the butt of his service weapon. His eyes, sharp, suspicious, and burning with resentment, scanned the Lexus as if it carried contraband instead of a man's dreams. Without greeting, without reason, Brad barked, "License and registration." Now, Ethan's voice was steady, measured. "Officer, is there a problem? Have I done something wrong?" No answer. Only a glare so cold it could freeze the blood in your veins. And then, the fatal assumption. Brad wasn't here to protect. He was here to judge. That silent understanding settled over Ethan like a second skin. He knew. In that moment, time seemed to slow. Every breath, every glance, every heartbeat. Heavy, deliberate. A man who had once stared down enemies on foreign soil now faced a new enemy at home, hatred in a uniform. And yet, Ethan remained calm, still polite, still hopeful that reason would prevail, still believing in the better angels of human nature. It should have been just another routine stop. It should have been a conversation. It should have been nothing. But on that sun-drenched street in Oak Valley, assumptions were deadlier than bullets. Ethan Carter, ever calm, ever respectful, slowly reached toward the inside pocket of his jacket, exactly where he kept his phone. One bullet, that's all it took. One bullet to rip apart a lifetime of service, honor, and dreams. Ethan Carter was not just another man behind the wheel of a luxury car that autumn afternoon in Oak Valley. He was a decorated U.S. Army colonel, a son, a father, a man who had faced death in distant lands, only to fall to prejudice on the very soil he fought to defend. Oak Valley was peaceful that day. Maple leaves floated down like promises of safety. Children played in backyards. Mothers prepared dinner, humming familiar songs. And Ethan, he was almost home. A strawberry shortcake on the passenger seat, a smile playing at his lips. He could already see his mother's eyes lighting up at the sight of him. But destiny had another plan. Brad Walker sat in his patrol car, bored, resentful, suffocating under the weight of his own biases. When he saw Ethan's black Lexus pass by, something ugly twisted inside him. A black man, in Oak Valley. Driving a car like that? It didn't matter that Ethan's record was spotless. It didn't matter that he had earned every medal that gleamed in his chest of memories. All that mattered, in Brad's poisoned mind, was the color of his skin. Brad hit the lights. Red and blue strobes sliced through the calm afternoon like sirens of doom. Inside the Lexus, Ethan's heart sank. He wasn't naive. He had been trained to face enemies, seen and unseen. He knew instinctively that this wasn't about a traffic violation. Still, he did everything right. Pulled over, hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. Window cracked just halfway. He waited, calm, professional, dignified. Brad stomped toward him, hand on his weapon, not with caution, but with contempt. "License and registration," Brad barked. No greeting, no explanation. Ethan's voice remained steady. "Officer, is there a problem?" No answer, just that icy glare. Ethan knew better than to argue. He reached slowly, deliberately, toward his inside jacket pocket. Not for a weapon, not for defiance, for his phone, to record, to protect himself. But in Brad Walker's mind, already clouded with fear and hatred, that motion meant only one thing: threat. "Don't move!" Brad screamed. And then, without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. Bang! The sound cracked through the air, louder than any thunder. Ethan jerked backward, confusion and pain contorting his face. He staggered, struck the side of the Lexus, slid down like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Blood blossomed across his shirt. His right hand still clutched the phone. Not a weapon, a phone, the very thing he had hoped would shield him. But now it lay discarded on the asphalt beside him, slick with his lifeblood. Neighbors watched in frozen horror from their windows. Some fumbled for their phones. One brave woman, Mrs. Parker, recorded everything, her hands trembling as she captured history being rewritten, one injustice at a time. Brad stood there, breathing hard, gun still raised, as if unsure whether to feel triumph or terror. Sirens screamed in the distance. But for Ethan, time had already run out. His breaths were short, shallow, each gasp a desperate prayer. No help came. No hands reached down to save him. Only cold concrete, warm blood, and the fading sound of children laughing somewhere down the block. By the time paramedics arrived, Ethan was barely clinging to life. They worked on him there, under the setting sun, pumping his heart, fighting for a miracle, but the damage was too great. At 9:17 p.m., under the sterile glare of hospital lights, Ethan Carter's journey ended. A life filled with service, a family filled with love. The footage Mrs. Parker captured hit the internet like a tidal wave. By dawn, Ethan's name was on every news ticker in America. This wasn't just another incident. This was a symbol, proof that even the uniform of a soldier couldn't shield a man from the color of his skin. Oak Valley changed overnight. The streets, once filled with trick-or-treaters and joggers, were now filled with protesters and candles, veterans in dress blues, teens with handmade signs, grandmothers with tears in their eyes. Justice for Ethan. No more silence. One phone, not a gun. Across the nation, Ethan's story touched a raw nerve. It wasn't new, but it was undeniable, clear, crushing. The media tried to soften it at first. Officer feared for his life. Unknown circumstances. But the video left no room for lies. There was Ethan, calm. There was Brad, escalating. There was the fatal shot, unprovoked, unjustified. And there on the ground was a phone, not a weapon. The Pentagon issued a statement within 24 hours, honoring Ethan's service. Generals demanded federal investigations. Civil rights leaders rallied. Even soldiers stationed overseas held moments of silence for one of their own. Ethan's funeral was a sea of uniforms and broken hearts. His wife, Eleanor, stood tall, clutching their two children close. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. When she placed Ethan's folded flag into their son's trembling hands, the message was clear. This loss belonged not just to their family, but to a nation still learning, still bleeding, still breaking. Justice is a slow, grinding machine, and sometimes it needs to be shoved into motion by the blood of the innocent. Brad Walker was arrested 4 days after Ethan Carter's funeral, not because he confessed, not because he showed remorse, but because the weight of the truth crushed every attempt to look away. Oak Valley's grand jury watched the footage, frame by agonizing frame, and returned an indictment for first-degree murder, premeditated, intentional, the kind of charge no badge could shield him from. Brad appeared in court in an ill-fitting suit, looking smaller than the man who once stood over Ethan with a smoking gun. He pled not guilty. He said he feared for his life. He said it was a misunderstanding, but the truth sat heavy in that courtroom, like an unwanted guest who would not leave. Eleanor Carter sat in the front row every single day, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes never leaving Brad. Not with hatred, not with rage, but with something far more powerful, expectation, demand, an unyielding call for accountability. The prosecution built their case like master craftsmen laying bricks. They showed the video. They slowed it down. They blew it up on giant screens so the jury could see Ethan's open palms, his calm movements, his phone. They brought in experts, use-of-force specialists, ballistics analysts, police trainers, all testifying the same chilling truth. Brad Walker had violated every rule, every protocol, every oath. There was no threat, no justification, only fear and prejudice. Witness after witness took the stand. Neighbors who heard no warning. Officers who admitted, reluctantly, that Brad's behavior had long raised concerns. Veterans who saluted Ethan's character and wept openly on the witness stand. The defense tried everything. They portrayed Brad as a man under pressure, a man who made a tragic mistake. They dredged up old incidents from Ethan's past that had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with that day. They whispered about dangerous neighborhoods and split-second decisions. They pleaded for empathy, but empathy had left the room the moment Ethan's blood touched the pavement. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Eleanor took the stand. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply spoke. Her voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the courtroom like a blade. My husband survived Iraq. He survived Afghanistan. He survived serving a nation that often failed to see him, but he could not survive the hate in one man's heart. Ethan wasn't dangerous. He wasn't threatening. He was a father on his way to see his mother. A soldier still carrying the weight of 1,000 battles, fought for people he would never meet. I am not asking for pity. I am not asking for vengeance. I am asking for justice, not just for Ethan, but for every son who leaves home and doesn't come back because of fear dressed as authority. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, not even the judge. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. When they returned, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. The foreman stood, a middle-aged black woman with trembling hands. The judge asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And what is your verdict?" She swallowed hard, then spoke. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Brad Walker, guilty of murder in the first degree." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Brad's shoulders slumped as if the ground had opened beneath him. Eleanor closed her eyes, a single tear trailing down her cheek. Not of grief, but of release. Justice, battered and bruised, had arrived. Late, but real. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, an old veteran himself, spoke slowly. "Mr. Walker, you have not only taken a life, you have betrayed everything your badge stood for. You allowed prejudice to become your guiding hand. You fired not in fear, but in hatred. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The gavel fell with a crack that echoed through the marble halls. Outside the courthouse, a sea of people waited. Some held candles, some held signs, some held each other. When Eleanor stepped out onto the steps, the crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in a solemn, standing ovation. For Ethan, for justice, for the dream that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Ethan Carter is gone, but because of him, a badge now demands accountability. A uniform demands responsibility. And a phone is no longer mistaken for a weapon. One man's hatred ended Ethan's life, but one family's courage and one community's refusal to look away made sure his death would not be in vain. The journey for justice did not end with a verdict. It had only just begun, because true justice, the kind that changes hearts, not just headlines, is a battle we must fight every single day. Ethan Carter's story reminds us all, silence kills, hatred blinds, but hope, even battered and bleeding, can still rise from the ashes. And sometimes, one man's story is enough to light a fire that will never go out. The verdict came. The sentence was passed. Brad Walker would live the rest of his days behind cold, unyielding bars. And yet, as the courthouse emptied and the cameras packed up, a greater question hung heavy in the air. Was justice truly done? Ethan Carter would never come home again. He would never hug his children, never laugh with his mother in the kitchen again, never march in parades, never counsel young soldiers fresh to service, never whisper words of courage in the darkest corners of the world. No sentence could change that. The truth is, justice is never truly finished. It is not a gavel strike or a press conference or a line in a newspaper. It is a living, breathing thing, fragile, fleeting, and desperately in need of guardians. And now, we are those guardians. Across America, Ethan's story became more than a headline. It became a call, a wound exposed, a fire rekindled. Murals of his face sprang up on city walls. Veterans groups wore his name embroidered next to their own medals. Schools began teaching his case in history classes, not as a relic of the past, but as a warning for the future. Eleanor Carter, a woman who had already given enough, became a reluctant voice for a movement she never asked to lead. She spoke at rallies, in courtrooms, before Congress. Not out of ambition, but because she knew silence was a luxury they could no longer afford. "We do not rise by mourning the dead," she told one restless crowd under pouring rain. "We rise by demanding the living do better." Her words echoed into the hearts of thousands standing shoulder to shoulder, soaked to the bone, yet burning with purpose. Oak Valley changed too. New police leadership, mandatory bias training, body cameras on every officer, not as a punishment, but as a shield for citizens and police alike. Slowly, painfully, things began to shift. But progress was not linear. There were still whispers, still eyes that looked away, still systems weighed down by centuries of injustice. And so Ethan Carter's story lived on, not just in memory, but in movement. In every protest that marched peacefully through city streets, in every child who learned that courage means standing, even when it's hard, in every officer who now understood, a badge is not a weapon, it is a promise made to men like Ethan, a promise that must never again be broken. Years later, a small statue was erected in the heart of Oak Valley's new civic park. It wasn't grand, it wasn't flashy, just a life-size bronze of a man in uniform, standing tall, looking ahead with a quiet strength that refused to bend. At the base, carved into stone, were 4 simple words: "He served." We remember. Every Memorial Day, a small ceremony is held there. No speeches, no politics, just people gathering, lighting candles, placing flowers, bowing their heads. And when they leave, they do so not just in mourning, but in promise. Because Ethan's story is not just his, it is ours. It is a reminder that freedom is not just defended on battlefields abroad, but on sidewalks at home. That true patriotism is not blind allegiance, but the courage to confront our failures and fight for better. That the true measure of a nation is not how it honors its victories, but how it learns from its mistakes. And so we tell Ethan Carter's story, over and over, until the blood he spilled waters seeds of change that bloom into justice, for generations he will never meet. We tell his story because silence is complicity, because forgetting is betrayal, because remembering is resistance. Ethan Carter is gone, but his fight, our fight, is far from over. And if you are listening to this, if you felt your heart twist in anger, in grief, in hope, then know this: you are part of his legacy now. Carry it with honor, speak it with courage, live it with purpose, because a single bullet may end a life, but it can never end the truth. And the truth, Ethan Carter's truth, marches on. If Ethan Carter's story touched your heart today, don't let it end here. Share his name, share his legacy, speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. And if you believe, as we do, that truth must be told, hit like, subscribe, and join us as we bring more untold stories into the light. Because remembering isn't just an act, it's a revolution.